Welcome to the Relax, It's Retirement podcast with Josh Leonard from Leonard Advisory Group. In this podcast, we help those nearing retirement greet it with a well-prepared smile. Join Josh and his guests to learn the retirement and tax planning tips you need so you too can live your golden years with the happiness and excitement you deserve. Hear stories from his years of experience to help you transition into a fun and intentional retirement. Now, onto the show.
I think, that's it. People think, oh, I'm going to retire. I saved all this money. Great. I'm retired. Now I'm going to use all the money. But that's not really the case. Many times retirement lasts a very, very long time. Just in February of this year, we had my grandmother pass away who was 97. Now, some backwards math. She was born before me too. So if my grandmother lived till 97 and her mother before her was 91, most likely my mother's going to live even longer. So when you're planning for retirement, we want to make sure that we have a good timeline set up. I think oftentimes folks think, I'm retired. I need everything today. Instead, we need to think about a really long timeline.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we talk about with people when we start establishing a plan, it's hey, what's your expiration date? How long does this thing last? And obviously, nobody knows that answer, right?
We don't know.
So,
yeah, and I think I think in framing it, the questions that like Pete and I will ask is, oh, okay, well, are your parents still with us? Yes. Okay. How old are your parents, right? If your parents are like my grandmother, 97 or into their 90s, we need to be planning, assuming you're still in good health today, that long runway. If your parents live till, and my mom's guilty of this. She, well, just because my mom lived to 97 doesn't mean that I'm going to. Well, that's true, but we should plan for it.
That's right. One of the first places we do look is, family history. Your parents, grandparents, and obviously that changes with society as a whole as well. Obviously our great grandparents, even if they had a longer life, it's all relative, so it's important to keep these things in perspective, and really, what we've seen is, is those things do start to align, once somebody is in retirement, and their parents lived longer, they tend to live longer. It's almost, the longer you live, it's like the longer you live, the longer you're going to live almost,
Yeah, I think we often talk about that lifespan after age 65, but really if you look at mortality tables, it does take a little bit to get past 18. And, if you think back to those younger years, kind of makes sense, right? You take some risks in your younger years that you learn better. This is the next phase, right? So you learn how to safely operate a car without killing yourself, hopefully, in your younger ages. Once you're in retirement, we also need to plan and set up the proper structures that we can thrive over that next maybe 20, maybe 30 plus years. Right. When we look at a plan, we look at, hey, how do we structure assets and how do we structure plans appropriately to reach that 30 plus year retirement?
What are some of the keys then, Josh, that we need to be thinking of and putting in place if it could potentially be 30 plus years, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think, probably the biggest concern we hear from folks is, what can I do to not run out of money in retirement, right? That is the biggest fear. If you live 30 plus years and, well, you worked between 30 and 40 years, that's a long time, right? So we need to properly structure our assets. And like we've talked about on the podcast before, and Pete wrote a great Kiplinger article about as well, our 3-bucket approach, we feel is the best way to kind of handle that. Make sure we have that short-term money in the cash bucket. So any expenses for emergencies are covered. If we know we need to get a new car in a couple of years, let's build up that cash bucket a little bit higher so we have money to do so. From there, let's protect our income for the next 6 to 10 years in our income bucket. where those income sources are pretty stable. We know where the money's coming from, and if the market's up, down, or sideways, it doesn't make a difference. Our income's still coming in on a monthly basis. After that, let's grow to replace those other two buckets as we spend down the assets. So in that growth bucket, our timeline is 6 to 10 years or 10 plus years, depending on what stage of retirement you're in, knowing that we have the income and an emergency fund covered. In terms of growth then in that growth bucket, well, it's not all being stuffed under the mattress. We are taking some risk in the portfolio there, knowing that we still have time to grow it. When you're 20 years old starting out a job, the conventional wisdom is you can take more risk because you have a long term, or you have a long time until retirement. Well, I think even on day one of retirement, your timeline is still pretty long too.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that you can have things better compartmentalized, in your head to, whenever, you are in retirement, different things kind of come up that were unforeseen. The more that we can plan for those emergencies and, and making sure that your income is in good shape, that, the better off you are. Certain things, are just going to, like we talked about, if you're invested in, the market, there's going to be, a certain amount of risk. And, if everything starts to tank, it's pretty tough if 100% of your money is all in that, in that risky area. It can, and really a lot of this and what we talk about is whenever we do establish that plan, it's making sure we have these kind of fail safes that we make sure that we stick to this plan, and how do we do that? And it's using that three bucket approach, and that's what it's all about.
As a financial advisor, though, our job is not to write legislation. We'll leave that to those other people. Whether or not they do a good job is a very separate conversation, but we want to help you navigate that. So, hey, these are the rules that we have to play by. What's the best way to navigate it? I think, as you alluded to, the problem is people are maybe sold this long-term care insurance thinking, oh, I'm covered for later on. And then as those premiums go up, they're not covered. They're not able to be covered. This is also true with your drug plan. So we had mentioned a little bit previously about checking in on your Part D or your prescription drug plan annually. We need to shop that out each and every year in retirement. Even if your drug list hasn't changed, there might be a better plan that can save you money. For my parents, we did that last year. Their monthly premium went from about $10 down to 50 cents. I'll pay a 50-cent premium for any sort of coverage. That's fine, even if I don't use it. 50 cents is cheaper. Well, for some of the medications they were taking, the medications were actually cheaper through the lower cost plan as well. So it makes sense to take a look at this each and every year. This is a great way we can control our costs of our drugs, which as we get older can be a very, very substantial part of our healthcare expenses.
Yeah, those things are always changing. There's always something new being developed, something that's been around for a while that now has a generic option. Mm-hmm. People, kind of doing the Costco or Sam's Club thing where maybe you can buy in bulk, something you're going to need for a while, or even some options that are maybe just north of the border. So there's some ways to try and rate in those costs for your prescription drugs.
Yeah, our Part D plan is one piece of it. I think also looking shopping out through other things like there's like good RX cards or different pharmacy cards that you can get. Sometimes drugs are even cheaper through those avenues. We've had a few instances where through an employer's prescription plan, the cost of drugs was lower for a client than once they were going to go on to Medicare. So in doing that planning, they thought, hey, can I see if maybe I can get a 3-month supply or a 6-month supply, depending on what's allowed with those individual drugs. But maybe we buy those ahead a little bit, or maybe if it's like a ointment or something that you only use occasionally, well, great, let's stock up on that before we switch over to the new plan. So just thinking ahead there and knowing what your costs are going to be after that transition can help you save some money there. But we're going to have some healthcare costs.
That's right.
So let's use the most magical healthcare account, the HSA, to hopefully save us some money, right? So I know I've talked about it. It is it's so magical. Like, it is super, because you don't pay taxes when you put the money in. You don't pay taxes when you take the money out, as long as it's used for healthcare. And you don't pay taxes on the growth in the meantime. So if you're still working and you're thinking about preparing for retirement, great. Let's stock as much money as we can into an HSA if you're eligible for it. So you have to have a high deductible insurance plan in order to be eligible for that. But for an individual, this year you can put $4,150 into the HSA. If you're a little bit older, so 55 plus, that retirement's coming really soon, you can tack on another $1,000 onto that.
Is this something that you have to go through your employer, or can you open up your own account like on your own?
Good question. So unlike a 401k, an employer will offer a plan, but you don't have to keep it with the employer. So if you have an HSA through your employer, make sure that you're taking full advantage of it. A lot of employers will offer a match on the HSA to a certain amount, or if you do certain wellness activities, they'll give you maybe a $500 or $1,000 credit in your HSA as well. So make sure you're aware of those benefits, but you're able to roll that over into a self-managed HSA with someone like Fidelity, or you can shop online to find a lower cost provider. They can't hold that captive. You're allowed to roll that over at any time.
But it has to be through your employer where it starts. Is that what you're saying?
No, you can set up a plan individually, but most of the time there is some incentive for using the employer plan, whether it's a match or, for a wellness activity, they give you some kind of credit there as well. But you don't have to do it.
I don't have this option. I have the other option where I have, I can't even carry the money over. It gets you
have a flexible spending account. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that situation, I have what I have, right?
That's true. Yeah. Do you have a high deductible plan though?
We did, but I don't think that we do anymore because again, people kept using it, so they make changes.
So the key is having that high deductible plan. But let's say you're self-employed and you buy your own health insurance, you can set that up wherever you want. It doesn't have to be through an employer.
So if your goal is to retire early, it does make sense to start planning ahead of time to build up, some tax diversification, put a little bit more in savings and that kind of stuff.
So you really can't be withdrawing from your investment accounts and your 401ks because you're not at that age.
Well, you can. There's just rules that you have to follow by. Yep. So you have to follow specific types of distributions. If you have a 401k, there's rules that you can withdraw at age 55 and a half. Or at age 55. So there are certain rules. You just need to know that rule book and plan ahead of time.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, crafting that sustainable withdrawal strategy is really important, and understanding how things are taxed and the implications that, you think you have a certain amount of money, but if you try and take it out, it's, there could be penalties associated with that. We don't want to give away our money. You worked hard for it, right?
I know I did. I don't know about you guys.
Well, and I think in terms of the FIRE movement, if you're saving 70% of your income, you're most likely maxing out your 401ks and IRAs and then plenty more. So you would be saving money after tax. You'd be paying the taxes and putting that money away in a brokerage or savings account anyways. So in these examples of someone retiring at 30 or in their 40s, just by the nature of how much they're saving, they're going to need to be saving in different taxable buckets outside of traditional retirement accounts.
Well, and the whole idea of saving 70% is very intriguing to me. And you guys touched on it saying how, it's not very realistic, but what if it is somebody that's, child free and all that? Like, are you able to buy a house if you're saving 70% of your income? Obviously depends on how much your income is, but I would think that you would want a house.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of these folks, part of that would be not buying the big 4-bedroom new house. You're probably buying a smaller home, something that you can pay off in a shorter time period. It also depends on where you live. Like, certain areas, the cost of living is so high that any housing expense is going to make it hard to save 70% of your income.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, to think about that this would even be possible and be able to live, especially in today's world where, the focus is on material things or these great experiences. I was reading about some of those shows at the Sphere, and it just seems just so amazing that you can really prioritize spending a few $1,000s on a ticket to see something for a couple hours. It's amazing that you can start thinking about those things. So you do have to really be willing to adopt a minimalist lifestyle to do this. But that doesn't have to be the case whenever we're looking at retirement. So even when we're looking at this, this FIRE movement, there's a few different ways that people could use this. There's like the fat FIRE movement, which is, hey, I don't want to change my lifestyle at all. I want to be able to retire and live the same as I'm living right now. So that takes a little bit different planning. There's the lean FIRE movement, which is, hey, I'm only living on I think really it's less than $25,000 a year, and so you're really just a minimal. And there's one that we talk about, and it's called the Barista FIRE. And what that is talking about maybe getting a part-time job after you retire, so like a barista or something that, if you really enjoy coffee or doing something like that. So these are some of the things that you can think about in retirement.
Yeah, I think this barista FIRE piece is like something that we talk about. We don't necessarily deem it that, but hey, part-time work, passion work, explore a hobby or something that, gives you a little bit of additional income, but it's not all income based, right? We're not necessarily trying to maximize income. It's more for social interaction, still deriving a sense of purpose, sometimes some bigger things than just the paycheck. Meet with your financial advisor is step one. If you really feel confident in your own tax planning, certainly you can do some projections on your own, see where you think you might be falling in your tax returns. We always feel like a second set of eyes is helpful in that situation. Many times people are overlooked, or certain situations are overlooked. They forget that now on their bank accounts they have higher yield than they did in years past. So we need to make sure we factor in that interest when we're projecting our tax rates. Meeting with a financial advisor, or if you don't have a financial advisor, you're working with a CPA, you could call them. For most CPAs, we see that they're a little bit more reactive rather than proactive. You go and see them after the year is ended, so after the fourth quarter, and then you're watching the tape, right? You're watching the tape to say, hey, what did we do wrong in this game? And is there anything else we can do to fix it, right? We can argue that the balls were deflated, right? And that
bad ref calls. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That score is final.
Yeah. I think for us during the game is a little bit more important, right? There are some things we can do after the year ends, like IRA contributions to try to reduce, our taxes, depending on where your income falls. But if we're focused in on the fourth quarter, many times we can make larger steps to minimize our tax impact overall. Pete and I were at a Morningstar conference earlier this year, and we're listening to a tax piece. And I think one of the things that has really stuck with me over time is that the goal of tax planning in retirement planning is to not have zero taxes for 1 year. Instead, it's to have the lowest tax rate over your lifespan, right? So early on in retirement, many times folks will tell us, I didn't pay any taxes last year, right? I prepped my tax return and I didn't have to pay anything. That's fantastic. Well, to us, that's kind of a red flag that maybe we should have sold off some stock, right? Maybe we should have filled up that tax bracket the whole way. If they still had the opportunity to sell off $25,000 in capital gains from their company stock and they didn't do it, well, now that's a missed opportunity. That window's closed. As we progress through retirement, like to our RMD ages at age 73, where we're forced to take distributions, a lot of these windows close. We have less tax flexibility.
Yeah, people don't think that they have that many options whenever you stop working, and that's actually whenever we see the greatest benefit, because people have a little bit more control over their income. They have a little bit better understanding on what they need to live. You aren't saving for things like retirement. You're there, and other factors. Maybe maybe you're on Medicare and things like that. So it's really important, not only whenever you are maybe getting ready to retire, but those years that right after you do retire, we see the most benefit. Actually, the most opportunity, I should say, for people to kind of mitigate their taxes. Like we say, I mean, you're going to pay taxes. One of those guarantees in life, but we want to make sure through proper planning that you don't pay one penny more than what you owe.
Okay. So what are some things that people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think keep in mind, are you in a higher than average tax year or lower than average tax year? And these can occur if you're working or if you're retired, right? Sometimes we have clients that are retired, but they maybe had some stock options. Those stock options were exercised this year, and all of a sudden they're in a higher tax bracket. Well, we're not going to try to realize more gains that year, right? In that situation, if we're in a higher tax year, we want to look for a loss. If we're in a lower or an average tax year, maybe we want to realize some of those gains along the way. So I think good general rule, higher tax year, we want a loss, right? We want to reduce it. Lower tax year, we want to gain. Try to fill up those tax brackets. We always want to be careful in the long term, too. If we are continuously taking losses, we're going to have a higher long-term capital gain rate because we have more gain to potentially realize. However, if you're fortunate enough that maybe you plan to never sell those stocks, we can hold on to those for the next generation. There's a rule of a step up in basis at death. So if I choose to hold a stock my whole life and my boys inherit it whenever I pass away, the cost basis resets at my date of death. So even if I paid $1 for a stock and then I pass away at the age of 110, and that's now worth $200, there's $199 worth of gain in that stock. My boys' new cost basis would be at $200. So if they sold it that day, there'd be nothing taxable to them for capital gains. If they held on to it and it appreciated further than there, they would only pay on that additional gain.
From the 200, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So sometimes we meet with clients and if they're not going to ever touch the stocks, maybe instead of doing this gain harvesting, it pays to look at something like a Roth conversion or something else to fill up a tax bracket. So although we don't file taxes until April of the following year, there's a lot of opportunities we miss if we don't take advantage before the end of the calendar year.
All right. So let's hear it. What should I be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one that we talk through a lot with clients is Roth conversions. Does it make sense to take some of your IRA money, pay the taxes on it now, and move it over to a Roth IRA? We would say this is kind of one of the 5 key strategies that you want to look at before the end of the year. For us, in our planning system, we did this a lot last week with our fall meeting schedule in Pittsburgh. I was there doing client reviews, and one of the things that we focus on is filling up your current tax brackets. For most of our clients, if they happen to be falling in the 12% tax bracket, we don't really ever think their taxes are going to be much lower than that. So that's not a political statement. It's just, well, you're going to be taxed. And if most of your accounts are in IRAs or 401ks, those are taxable accounts. If you need this much income and you're going to be taken out from an IRA to fill up the difference between that income level and Social Security, you're probably going to be taxed in a certain range each and every year. One of the question marks that we don't know is how much our IRA balance is going to be come RMD age. So for most folks, hitting that threshold here soon, 73, some it might be 75, But at that point, they're forced distributions. You don't have a choice but to take it out. Well, if those forced distributions are going to push you up into the 22% tax bracket, it's better off to pay 10% less in tax and pay some of it today. Then that growth from here on out will be tax-free. You have to follow certain rules when you do Roth conversions, but for the most part, that's a tax-free asset. If you're in that position where you're going to be forced more than you need to take out, we should start positioning assets to potentially transfer to the next generation as well. So a Roth IRA is better to inherit than an IRA since it is a tax-free asset. So Roth conversions are a huge thing to look at. The great thing is once you get that money into that Roth IRA, Wendy, it can continue to grow tax deferred and tax free. So you're not paying taxes along the way or when you distribute it.
What is the most important then thing to consider then? We have to figure out what tax bracket we're currently in and whether we have the tax money to pay for that, what would be considered income if we're flipping it to a Roth.
That's a great point. Having the additional money available can certainly be a plus. Or if in years past you're getting a big refund, you could target increasing your taxable income enough to kind of make that equal. When you do a Roth IRA conversion, you can withhold taxes as well. So if you don't typically get a tax refund, you're pretty good on your withholding, so you're kind of hitting it even every year. And you don't have extra cash before the end of the year to pay the taxes on that. You could convert and withhold taxes in that conversion at whatever tax bracket we're assuming you're going to fall into. I think this really comes into general tax planning too, though. You need to know where you're sitting. If you just say, hey, I don't want to pay taxes in the future, I'm going to take all my money and move it over to a Roth IRA today because these are great accounts, you're going to be in a lot of pain. For one, you're probably going to bump yourself up to the highest possible tax bracket. So you're going to pay at the highest possible tax rate. You're going to increase the cost of your Medicare as well. So your Part B and Part D, like we've talked about on previous episodes, those are based on income. Well, if you do a big Roth conversion, you're bumping your income up quite a bit there. So it really ties into general tax planning. I think it's a common misconception, though, as you brought up, Wendy, that you need to have that cash available. Certainly, you have to pay taxes, but the portion of your IRA, or even if you do your whole IRA account, if it's a smaller individual account, you could withhold the appropriate amount of taxes in that conversion process. If you're not working with a financial advisor, we are here to help. For listeners of the show, we've put together 7 big retirement mistakes checklist. There'll be a link in the show notes. You can click to download that to see how you're tracking. If you are making several of those mistakes, reach out to us. We're happy to help get you on the right track and get you prepared for retirement. And until next time, thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Pete. Remember to retire with intent so you can live your golden years with the happiness and excitement you deserve.